Alright, let's start the big cleanup. Nodding in agreement with my husband's words, we began our deep cleaning, determined to scrub every corner of our home. Normally, due to work, we weren't often home, so we didn't get many opportunities to clean like that. So, we put in extra effort. At that time, we had no idea what we were going to find. My name is Sarah. I'm a 48-year-old housewife, working part-time. My husband, William, who is the same age as me, is a company employee. We have a son, but since he works in a different state, it's just the two of us living together now. We moved to this place about 5 years ago. My father-in-law's chronic illness worsened, so my husband suggested we move closer to his parents' home, and we relocated to an apartment nearby. 1 year later, my father-in-law passed away. As there was no reason for us to move again, we continued to live there. My mother-in-law lived alone in the family home, just a 5-minute walk from our apartment. She might have been considered overly attentive, but it seemed more like she enjoyed making others feel indebted to her. My husband said she'd always been like that, but it worsened after my father-in-law's death. She was very needy and adored her son, my husband, so much that she seemed to wish we lived with her. She found me bothersome, but she wouldn't say that to me face to face as she didn't want her son to hate her. She would often do things that no one ever thought of doing. The most surprising thing she'd done so far was when she gave my husband a hand-knitted scarf. It had a big heart and his name embroidered on it. It was quite off-putting. Moreover, she even told him, "Why don't you divorce your inconsiderate wife, who is always busy with her work and neglects housework? You can live with me instead." My husband disliked her condescending attitude and her need for constant gratitude, so he firmly asked her to leave him alone. Things improved a bit after that because she didn't want to upset him. She was annoying me as well. Recently, she brought over a load of vegetables saying, "A friend of a friend gave these to me, so I'm giving them to you." On a closer look, I could tell they were wilted and that some were even starting to go rotten. Even when I tried to decline politely, she retorted, "Are you trying to embarrass me?" These were grown with care by a friend of a friend. It wasn't really an embarrassment since the giver was someone she hardly knew, but she didn't see it that way. She would bring over some kind of stew, saying, "I made this for you." We tried it, but it tasted horrible. I don't know if she made it taste bad on purpose or if it just turned out that way, but regardless, despite her claim of being caring, she ended up being more of a nuisance. I often wondered how we could address her need for validation and approval from others. I'd been very patient as I felt sorry for her losing her husband and being alone, but I was reaching my limit and needed to speak up. A few days later, I talked to my husband about it. "I wish your mother would stop coming over to our place without asking. It's annoying. Especially when she brings the food she made without checking to see if they're okay. Can you please talk to her about it?" My husband, who was often away from home, was surprised. "Oh, really? I thought she always called before coming." The next day, while I was at work, my mother-in-law called me on my phone, which was unusual. Thinking something might have happened, I answered in a hurry. "Sarah, I'm making lasagna today. What time will you be back?" "I'll bring it over," she said, leaving me dumbfounded. No, that wasn't what I meant. My husband must have told his mother about our conversation from the day before. Nobody asked her to check with us before bringing food over. What I wanted to say was that I didn't want her coming over without contacting us first, and that we didn't need any food from her. But surely, my husband also conveyed it in a roundabout way. In a similarly indirect manner, I told her that I would probably have to work late on that day and that I didn't know what time I would be back. I also said to her we had leftovers from the previous day, and that we didn't need any food brought over. But even then, she said, "I'll just leave it at the front door," and hung up, ignoring my refusal. When I got home, there really was a container of lasagna at the front door. I had no idea when she left it there. It was just placed there in the container, raising concerns about hygiene, and I didn't even feel like touching it. I thought I should tell my husband what happened when he came home from work. As soon as my husband returned home, I told him about his mother's visit on that day. To which he replied, "What? I haven't had the chance to talk to her about what we discussed last night. I was planning to have a proper conversation this weekend." I was puzzled, having assumed my husband had already spoken to her. From then on, strange things started to happen. One night, I said to my husband, "Tomorrow, there's a sale at the supermarket. Can we go there together?" Then the next day, we ran into my mother-in-law at that supermarket. If my husband said, "I got movie tickets for the weekend evening show," we would encounter her at the movie theater. It was all very weird. Each time, I asked my mother-in-law how she knew we would be there, and she would say she heard about the sale from her neighbor. Or that her friend told her the movie was good. Despite my caution, she continued visiting our apartment often. I started to wonder if she had tampered with my phone when I wasn't around. So I began keeping it with me at all times, but the situation didn't change. My husband and I discussed how creepy and unsettling it was, but we couldn't figure out how she knew where we were going. Then, on the day we began our big cleaning. Looks like this is the last spot to clean. While cleaning our bedroom, we found an unfamiliar power strip plugged into an unused wall outlet. We knew that the wall outlet was there, but rarely needed to use it. But there it was, a power strip we didn't recognize. My husband and I exchanged puzzled glances. "What's this?" He then pulled it out. My husband turned pale as he closely examined the unplugged power strip. Confused, I frowned and looked at him. He then placed the power strip down and gestured for me to leave the bedroom. Once we were out of the bedroom and in the living room, he spoke in a low voice. "That might be a bug." "Really?" His unexpected words made me furrow my brow. He asked me again if I recognized the power strip, but I had no recollection of it. I remembered a TV show we watched together the other day discussing bugs and how power strips were commonly used. If the bug was planted there, it meant someone entered our bedroom when nobody was home. Who could it be? And why? We debated whether we should report it to the police. We were feeling confused and frightened when the doorbell rang. It was my mother-in-law at the front door. "Look, I made this sweater for you, William. It's gotten colder recently. This will keep you warm, so make sure you wear it." She handed over the sweater to my husband with a smile. She added, "I don't want you catching a cold again," which made me suspect her. We were still in the middle of our big cleanup, and after finishing, we planned to wax the floor. Since the wax would take more than half a day to dry, I told my mother-in-law that we were planning to stay at a motel that night, effectively sending her away. Later, as my husband and I discussed the situation, it seemed he had the same thoughts as I did. Should we report this to the police, even if it's a family matter? I asked him in a low voice, but he looked troubled. But calling the police over this would be embarrassing for the family. Plus, we don't know the purpose behind it. We suspected my mother-in-law might be the person who planted the bug in our bedroom. There were many questions, like how she entered and why she did it. Recently, she had been showing up at places we talked about in our bedroom. And she mentioned my husband's cold, something we hadn't told her, which raised our suspicions. We assumed she was the perpetrator and discussed how to gather evidence before confronting her or calling the police. After much discussion, my husband had an idea and confidently said, "Leave it to me," as he headed to our bedroom. My husband took the bug to another bedroom and plugged it into a wall outlet. He then covered it with a newspaper and pointed a fan at it. I tilted my head, puzzled, but as we left the bedroom, he explained to me. By covering it with a newspaper and directing the wind onto it, the bug would only pick up a rustling sound. If someone was listening in, they would surely think the device was malfunctioning. Indeed, that made sense when he explained it that way. If I thought it was broken, she would either try to retrieve it or to set it up again. Let's see if that'll work for the next few days. My mother-in-law would most likely make up a good excuse to come and visit us, and she might try to sneak into the bedroom without getting caught. If that happened, we could catch her in the act and clarify things once and for all. We planned to observe for a few days, but the incident occurred that very night, which was earlier than expected. Earlier that day, I told my mother-in-law that my husband and I would be staying the night at a motel, but after what we found in our bedroom, we decided not to wax the floor and stayed at home. Then, late at night, I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. My husband and I exchanged surprised looks. Then, we heard someone walking in our apartment and opened the bedroom door. At that moment, I switched the light on. There stood my mother-in-law. "Weren't you supposed to stay over tonight?" With that, my mother-in-law froze. I said, "We canceled our plans." You see, we found a bug in our bedroom. So, we made it look like it was malfunctioning. We thought the culprit might come to check on it. Hearing this, my mother-in-law stepped back. But my husband didn't let her get away. He grabbed the house key my mother-in-law had in her hand. We didn't give you a copy of our house key, did we? As soon as my husband said that, my mother-in-law turned pale. I thought you sneaked into the bedroom when you visited us, but did you actually use a spare key to enter and plant the bug while we weren't home? I glared at my mother-in-law. What bug are you talking about? As my mother-in-law was playing dumb, I brought out the bug from the other bedroom and confronted her. We covered it with newspaper and directed a fan at it. If someone was listening, they would have heard rustling noises. You thought it was broken and came to check, didn't you? I said sternly, but my mother-in-law just looked away, saying nothing. I was getting increasingly frustrated. It sounds ridiculous, but there are people who bug their daughters-in-law for harassment. Were you trying to find my weaknesses? Or did you just want to know more about William, or perhaps you were missing him? Every time William and I went out, you happened to be there as well. That was because you were listening to our conversations, right? I understand you're lonely since your husband passed away, but this has gone too far. Even then, my mother-in-law wouldn't look at me. I continued. By the way, it's unacceptable to leave food in a plastic container directly on the floor. It's unhygienic and unsafe to eat, and it will end up being thrown away. And please stop bringing over a huge amount of rotting vegetables that we can't even use. My husband, who had been listening, nodded and spoke up. She's right. Showing up at our home unannounced and other places is an invasion of our privacy, and is genuinely concerning, to put it bluntly. This remark seemed to hurt my mother-in-law deeply. She began to sob. You used to visit us all the time, but ever since your father died, you stopped coming to our house. And the only time you ever contacted me was to say not to bring things over, which was heartbreaking. I just wanted to feel a little more appreciated for bringing things you might need. Yet, recently you haven't even said thank you. She started crying uncontrollably. That didn't make any sense at all, but it seemed she desperately wanted to see her only son William and to be appreciated. Her need for constant validation was overwhelming. I knew there were valid reasons why William valued his father more than his mother. But my mother-in-law seemed to have forgotten or was trying to pretend as if nothing had happened, prompting me to blurt out. Of course, William loved his father more than you. His father worked hard all his life and took care of the family. Whereas you were hardly ever home, spending money that your husband earned. My mother-in-law had always loved to socialize, often going out and leaving my husband alone at home even when he was little. My father-in-law thought the mother's presence was important in the development of a child and never opted for divorce. My husband had always made it clear he was grateful to his father, but not to his mother. My husband mentioned that his mother also had affairs, but he wasn't sure if his father knew about that. As she got older, with less money to spend after her husband's death and all those men who used to entertain her no longer around, she started to seek attention from her son. After hearing what I said to my mother-in-law, my husband nodded. That's right, so how can I be grateful to you, Mom? Actually, after Dad passed, I wanted to move away. But Sarah said you were getting old and that we should at least check on you occasionally, so we stayed here. Shouldn't you be the one expressing gratitude? Then my mother-in-law burst into tears again, repeating how lonely she was. Hearing this, I couldn't help but say with a straight face, just because you are lonely, that doesn't mean you can commit a crime. Did you really think it was okay for you to break in and plant a bug in our bedroom? Then my husband said, it's embarrassing for the family, but maybe we should involve the police. There hasn't even been an apology. Hearing this, my mother-in-law, who had been sobbing, suddenly stopped. It's not what you think. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I'm sorry. I'll apologize, so please don't make it a big deal by calling the police. The sight was so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh. What was your intention then? It's not normal to make a spare key to someone else's home without permission, and who thinks of planting bugs? It's downright creepy. Can you promise to have nothing to do with us from now on? Then my husband ushered my mother-in-law out, saying, we won't report to the police if you promise that you won't bother us ever again. Afterward, my husband and I discussed and decided to move. Of course, we didn't tell my mother-in-law when and where we were moving. Actually, my husband had been offered a promotion a little while ago, which required us to move to the neighboring state. At first, we were hesitant. But this incident made us decide to accept it. Once my mother-in-law was sure that we weren't going to report her to the police, she came to us with some money, claiming it was for the trouble she had caused, saying, "Let's put this matter to rest." Despite her lack of genuine remorse, we accepted the money but declared our estrangement from her. We got a lawyer to draft the documents, handed them to my mother-in-law, and moved. I heard that my mother-in-law became despondent after we moved, but she brought it upon herself. We were not there to satisfy her need for validation. The new location where my husband was transferred was near the town our son lives, so we got to see him more often. Although I cherish my son, he's an adult now, so I need to set boundaries with him. That actually makes me wonder why my mother-in-law was so obsessed with my husband and tried to interfere in his life. Our son mentioned that he might be getting married, and I am looking forward to hearing more about it. Learning from my mother-in-law, I hope to build a good relationship with my future daughter-in-law.